FM, 95.1 FM, The Light, and its management. And now, to address the legal concerns of our community, AM Light presents Legally Speaking. Here is today's host.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. We have an exciting show planned for today. I have my superstar panel again today, Attorney Vanita Banks and Attorney Milton Grimes. Before we get started, you can call in and join the discussion today at 317-239-1310, 317-239-1310. And also, before we get started, there's a couple things I need to go over that's very important. When I'm out and about, you come up to me in the grocery store and places I'm out and about, and then you ask me questions about the show. So for the gentleman who I talked to at Kroger, I want to tell you why I said there's only two things that I thought that Donald Trump was number one in. One is mass murders, two, in federal deficit. And here's what I mean. In 2016, in the United States of America, there was 179 mass shootings. That was the year that Donald Trump was elected president. He took office in January of 2017. In 2017, MAGA crowd went nuts, and we had 345 mass shootings. We thought that was outrageous. In 2018, we had 322 mass shootings in America. In 2020, the year the pandemic started, we had 614 under Donald Trump. In 2021, we had 693, and in 2022, 213. Now, the reason that's important, the mass shooting in America doubled and tripled under Donald Trump. The second thing is the federal deficit. The federal deficit recording started back in 1929. You remember they would call that the Great Depression? 1929, we started off with a budgetary deficit of zero. And so by the time Donald Trump took presidency, we had about a $20 trillion deficit. When he left, 28 trillion. 28 trillion. And in 2017, he went to 665 billion, 2018, 779 billion, 2019, 984 billion, and 2020, 3.132 trillion. In 2021, it dropped to 2.77 trillion. So we have a deficit of $28 trillion. Donald Trump created $7.7 trillion of the deficit. Now get this, in 4 years. So it took us from 1929, almost a century, to get to 20 billion, and it took him 4 years or less to get to 28 trillion. So he's number one in creating a deficit, number one in this mass murder. And I think that a lot has to do with gun violence in America, this gun ownership issue. But today we'll chime in with the superstar panel. Attorney Banks, how are you doing today?
I'm well. How are you, Attorney Lee? And thanks for having me.
Well, you had mentioned that we had this mass shooting at Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas. And have you followed that story, Counselor?
Of course, absolutely. With outrage, sadness, and frankly, thoughts and prayers are no longer enough. We just can't take this mass killing of our children anymore. And there have been 213 mass shootings in our nation this year, and at least 20 since last Tuesday. Many of them don't make the national news. I'm a member of the Links Incorporated, which is a national women's service organization of 13,000 women. And last week in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Dr. Preston Phillips, a highly regarded orthopedic surgeon in Tulsa, was killed by a patient in one of these mass shootings at his office, a hospital facility in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so the time is now to do something about these mass shootings. And 89% of Americans support reasonable gun reform. In fact, I don't know how many people are aware, but in the aftermath of the Parkland mass shootings, Florida passed a red flag law, which has resulted in judges acting more than 8,000 times to keep guns out of the hands of people that authorities determine to be a risk to themselves or others. And so a red flag law, the type passed in Florida, can be a model for the nation. This type of law permits police officers or family members to request a judge, to temporarily bar an individual from either possessing or purchasing a gun because they are a risk to themselves or to others.
Well, it's something very important that I think that people should know. People was rightly outraged. You know, we discussed this before the show started. There was a delay by a law enforcement official as the kids in Robb Elementary was calling, begging, pleading for their life for this 1 hour episode, and the chief of police of Uvalde did not intervene. You know, the one thing that when 9/11 happened, firefighters ran to that burning building without any delay. They went there to save lives, and at great risk to themselves and death to many of them, and injuries, permanent injuries and things like that. But that was their job. They got paid to put their lives on the line. The police officer in Uvalde, it seemed like to me, based on initial evidence I've seen, was a gross act of cowardice. I just thought that it was unfortunate they didn't go in there and try. When the kids were begging, I just don't understand that. But here's the problem, folks. No court has ever held police officer liable for failing to protect individuals. There was a number of cases brought, and these mass shooting cases are complicated. But the Marjorie Stone Douglas case, for example, where you had a police officer discipline who had a gun, who did not intervene to try to protect the kids. At least that's the allegation. His lawyer has a different take on it. But at the end of the day, they sued the police department and the case got dismissed based on the fact, the sheriff department, because there's no duty to protect, believe it or not. They get paid to protect, but our legal system in a legal quagmire give them immunity from suit. So a police officer in America, folks, can pick and choose what life they decide to save. And that's the status of our law now. And we need to get legislation probably to change that. But that's a gross injustice, I think, particularly when we see what happened at Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas. Obviously, this is some legislation that we need to reconsider because those officers must be held accountable. Now, the second part of this matter is that a counselor, I've worked on these mass shooting cases. The problem is civil liability. You know, we got in the Uvalde case, the gunman is killed. And so at some point, there's going to be a mass amount of litigation flowing from this matter. There's going to be lawsuits. Make no mistake about it, because this tragedy reaps of somebody should be held liable. And here's my thoughts. If there was a security guard or a security company that was hired to protect the school, obviously that would be the primary person that should be held liable. There was misrepresentation initially about the door being opened by a teacher. That was as it turns out, when I looked at the video, that was a false representation. The teacher saw a wreck to call 911, opened the door and saw a person with a gun, and then closed the door immediately. So it wasn't the teacher's fault, as it turns out. And so the point I'm making is that, so who else could be held liable? When I started analyzing it, the police officers who stood by for an hour and watched kids or heard kids plead for help, subsequently murdered, did not intervene, they're protected. So that leaves the school corporation, who has a duty to protect the student, and maybe a vendor. Gun manufacturers, those cases won't go anywhere in Texas, unfortunately. And so, I've been scratching my head over this. What do you think, Milton?
It's a hard one to call. I would like to hold the cops directly liable, Nate, but I wasn't there at that scene and knowing what they were deciding or making their decision on. Did they think rushing in would cause a slaughter of the kids? Did they think that he had stopped or was not going to shoot anymore? I just don't know enough to say comfortably what those cops should have done. It's hard for me to think that they thought they could have saved lives had they rushed in, but didn't rush in because they were cowards or had some other reason for doing so. I honestly don't know enough yet. I would like to read their interviews to see what they are saying, or what the lead officer is saying was his articulated reasons for not rushing in. But I can't phantom someone standing outside of my door thinking that there are 20 some kids in here and he is just shooting them one by one every other minute or so. And they don't say, well, he's going to kill them all. Let's rush in now and we can save some. I mean, that would be my first thought, but I just don't know all the thinking that was going on. Do you?
Well, here's the problem. I've done these mass shooting cases, and what I said earlier is that there's no case that ever held cops liable for failing to intervene.
Right.
Cops are immune from suit. A cop can pick and choose who they choose to protect, and the law said they're not held liable. And I said earlier, the Margaret Stoneman Douglas case was probably the typical example whereby they terminated the sheriff officer who was on duty. They made him look like he was a coward. His lawyer disagreed with that. So they filed suit against the sheriff department, and it got bounced out of court. And the Florida Supreme Court say no duty. There's never been a duty of any police officer to protect. But guess what? Their motto is to protect and serve. But they can pick and choose who they choose to protect and to serve. And unfortunately, they're immune from suit. So
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I had a case here in California where the officers were notified weeks ahead of time that this sergeant was going to kill this young lady, and he had solicited someone to do the hit. The person he solicited to go find him, a hit person, went and told the police. They didn't do anything about it. A couple of days later, before he killed the woman, the guy went to the police again and said, this guy is serious. He's going to do something to this woman. It ends up the sergeant killed and cut the baby out and killed the unborn baby that was, I think it was 7 months along. And they held that the court held police was not liable until they actually undertake some act that endangers the person or something like that. It was some backwards ass reasoning. But yeah, they are not held liable just because people may be dependent on them to do something. But my point here is for these cops at this school, unless, the law says, unless they undertake an act with these people, then they're not liable. and they hadn't undertaken any act that prevented anybody else from protecting these kids. But my question is, what was the reason given for them not acting? Maybe they had a reason for it. Maybe they thought if they rushed in, more people would get killed. I can only think that that's part of their thinking.
Didn't we initially hear, Attorney Lee, that the officers thought that it was a, quote, barricaded situation?
Well, depending on which version of the story you're talking about.
It has evolved each day.
The first version, the second version, the third version, or fourth version, or the fifth version, or the one yesterday when he said, we're going to give you the facts of it later. You know, my head was spinning. I mean, I was spinning when they were talking about what happened. Then the governor say, I'm mad as hell. They gave me misinformation.
Right. I've had a case where the cops changed it from my client was attacking them to a week later, Internal Affairs said, no, they thought the client had a weapon in a back pocket that she was reaching for. But it was all on video, thank God. And we knew the truth. They lied. He lied in both instances. But I would hate to think that police officers, protect to serve or whatever, would stand by, Nate, intentionally and give a lie, tell a lie as to why they didn't. I would hope that they had a legitimate reason for not rushing in, thinking that they were going to save lives by holding back. Don't you?
Well, my problem though, when I heard the tape of the kids calling and they didn't intervene when the kids were calling for help about the shooter, I was troubled by that. It just, to my core, it just bothered me. And it seemed like to me that either he's a coward or he is not concerned, or third, he's pretty dumb. I could not come up with any set of facts that would justify them waiting for over an hour. And the news people have been on them all week, and I'm not trying to, throw mud on them. It's just such an egregious act whereby it reeks of us now looking at this idea of giving these cops immunity, that we need to fix this. I mean, they arrested a woman that was trying to go in and save her kid, get her kid, but they don't go after the murderer. It was just insane to me.
Well, I don't know, guys. If it was that black and white, it would be insane to me too. I'm just trying to give some benefit of the doubt. And I'm trying to get, and I'm not a mass supporter of police, but I am trying to give the benefit of the doubt here until I know all the facts. I just don't.
And that's what's critical, that we do discover the facts. And as Attorney Lee said, the story has been evolving and changing. There have been so many versions, and that speaks to the thin line that's walked between providing information and when you don't have all the facts, and while it is critical that a independent investigation, of course, occur, and that public officials just don't rush out there. We know the public wants answers and wants answers quickly and immediately, but what we've seen over the last week is exhibit A on how it should not be done from my perspective.
There are all kinds of the MBTs, the radio communication to the who is it, Nate, that gets the 911? The dispatcher. The dispatcher. There should be an abundance amount of communication going on between dispatch and the cops. What are the 911 calls reporting to dispatch? Then dispatch report that to the police. We should have, or they should have, an abundance amount of communication indicating what information was being fed by the kids and what information was being fed to the cops and what information was being fed from the cops to maybe higher ups at the department, and what decisions were being made in live time on the spot. That information should be there in some forms or many forms or another. It should be.
Okay, let's take a caller or two. Okay, caller, you have a question or comment for us today?
Well, good morning, Brother Nate, and great day. I wish I can get on the golf course, and I bet your game is real good right now. But
No, the courts are open now. We're back to litigation. Is the courts are open. We're getting set up for jury trials, so I'm working 12 hours a day now, which is good.
yeah, that's my mother. And they've been back open in Illinois, and I think Attorney Banks, you're in Illinois, correct?
I am.
Right? Yeah, okay, yeah. My mother practices out of over there in Wacker. She's been there for decades now. She's been home since COVID, but she worked with the Legal Aid Society right over there in Wacker.
Excellent. I've collaborated with
Now,
Legal
for
Aid.
Black people. Yeah, helping out us people out here who need a lot of help and may not have the funds
Absolutely.
to litigation. So that's right. You know exactly. So I want to give you guys credit, first of all, for being who you all are, because I think lawyers make up less than 1/2 of 1% of the population, and so that is less than doctors, especially black doctors and black lawyers. So I want to give you that credit. Number one, we want to give credence, first of all, to the brother in Buffalo, the retired officer in Buffalo, who did confront the shooter there, Attorney Grimes, and he did return fire. Unfortunately, his 9mm wouldn't go through the body armor, and he was killed by the AR-50 shooter's AR-15. But that brother did return fire. He did hit him, but it didn't go through the armor.
I'm well aware of that, brother. That's why I said give him the benefit of the doubt. What's your question, man?
I'm talking about Buffalo. Yeah, I'm talking about Buffalo.
Yeah, I
That guy
understand.
returned fire. He returned fire. Number two, in Uvalde, they heard the man in the room shooting, killing people at the time. He was killing them while they were standing out there in the hallway. And then before that, they all went into the school and took their children out. That's a critical point right there. They went into the school, those officers, and removed their children. Their children they removed to safety. So they knew what was going on. They had the frame of mind to go get their children. They stood there in the hallway and heard him shooting. The last child, they called 911 from the window. The cop was looking at the child. He heard that child on the phone. He went back there and killed that child. So it was no case of they didn't know. They knew. We're gonna. I'm an ex-military veteran. I'm ex-veteran, United States Air Force. Okay, and you just don't leave anybody on the field, and that's what we were taught. And I don't understand that. They got armor, they got rifles. They weren't outgunned. They had 100 rifles themselves. They had plenty of weaponry. They could have put the dog in there, like they used in Dallas. They could have sent the drone in there. They had many things. They could have sent the drone in through that very window that was busted. They could have sent the drone in where the cop was talking to the child. So they had options. Okay, period. I just know, and the chief didn't have a radio on him. He admitted that the other day. He didn't have his radio. He didn't have his radio on him. So that's a critical problem too. But Nate, I called you, and maybe you guys can get into it in a minute, about Shin versus Arizona. That decision this week that came down with Sambo Thomas giving the majority opinion. That's a horrible decision. That is a horrible decision, especially for people who are innocent, getting their innocence proven, that was wrongly locked up. When you get a chance, please expound on that Shin versus Arizona. I think our public doesn't understand how critical that decision is and how it may affect, it will affect a whole lot of maybe black folks who were wrongly arrested, and the detriment to these laws that are created that we basically don't get a chance to create in this society. And thanks for taking my call.
Well, the Shin case has to do with ineffective assistance of counsel, and they reversed the lower court on a death penalty case 6-3. And basically, that's the way the courts are going now. And not a lot, I could add to that, except for the fact that the courts have gotten much more conservative. But back to the second issue, though, the shooting, they put in some additional facts that, I've been watching this. I didn't know that they had went in and saved their kids. I was unaware of that fact.
Me too.
I was unaware of that fact as well, but I was aware that one of the children had called 911 and stated that her teacher had been shot but was still alive. And back to Attorney Grimes' points about how all that real-time communication should be able to be reviewed to determine, the true facts and timeline of what happened. We do know, I did see that the 911 operator has been terminated because I read that she had hung up on one of the callers. But with respect to this child who called from the room, and there were several children that called from the classroom 911. And again, this particular child stated that my teacher is still alive, has been shot, but she's still alive. I can't determine from the media accounts whether or not those communications were ever relayed to the police chief. And now I'm hearing that he didn't have his radio with him. That's negligence on his face, at the very least. And so I'm just very troubled by this whole situation and outraged as most of America is.
Wow. Okay, let's go back to the phone and get another caller coming on this issue. Then we'll move to the next subject. Okay, caller, you have a question or comment about this shooting in Uvalde, Texas?
How you doing, Mr. Lee?
I'm doing great, Ms. Williams. Nice to hear from you, sir.
I got a question. The police had rushed in. The police had rushed in. They had killed 10 people that were proved on forensic. What type of action could be by the people that still as a result of the police? Police had rushed in. Another question. Police had rushed in without orders from their superiors. What type of discipline could have been imposed upon the police that had rushed in? Those are two questions I would like to.
Well, the first is pretty simple. There is no civil liability in a case when you have a sudden emergency like that. So the police officer is responding to an active shooting event. And so the fact that there's a secondary casualty wouldn't impose liability. He would have immunity. But the second part is that whether or not the police officer could be subjected to discipline in the event they disobeyed the commanding officer's command. And that's a tough one because police agencies have general orders that sometimes are unique to their department. I don't remember what our local general ordinance would say about that, but they're generally required to follow a chain of command. However, the exception, of course, is that if the instruction result in something that's known to be criminality, then you don't have to obey an unlawful order. That's in the military and things like that. So that's been one of the principles of our laws. But I have no idea what Uvalde Police Department rules and regulations are. So I think our next topic.
Attorney Lee?
Yes.
We were talking about what possible causes of action there may be, and we talked about the immunity issues with respect to law enforcement. I wanted to just raise the fact that gun manufacturers have largely been held to be immune from liability as well. But more recently, this year, the families and survivors, the Sandy Hook families, were able to obtain a $73 million settlement against Remington.
I thought that was pretty historic because the gun lobbyists and NRA pays out millions of dollars and to obtain political favoritism. And because of that, they have special legislation. And other than the Sandy Hook case, we've had this litigation going in Indiana, but it's been fraught with peril. And I'm not sure the current status, but it's something that I think that need to go forward. And I think like anything else, I think there should be some liability. Like, for example, we have drugs in our country that result in injuries and damage to people. And so the drugs are approved by the FDA. So we file lawsuits against drug manufacturers. We don't sue them based on the drug itself, because once they get approved, they have a certain amount of immunity. What we sue them on is advertisement type liability. So I'm thinking that at some point, these cases need to go forward on advertisement liability. In other words, the gun manufacturers are soliciting nut cases, the MAGA type crowd folks, to get these weapons of mass destruction. I don't see the connection between the Second Amendment and a automatic rifle that could shoot 500 people. I just don't see the connection, but that's where we're headed at in this country. Now, here's a disturbing thing. One final comment on this. America is about 3% of the world's population. Yet, this country has over 50% of private gun ownership in the universe. So we're 3% of the population, but the latest statistics actually said that we have 51% of all private gun ownership. So we lead the world in mass shooting. We have more people down in the United States than in the country being invaded by Russia now. Look at all these deaths we're getting. It's just astounding to me. It's almost like we're under military siege. And this problem started, folks. It's not a new problem, but it's accelerated under the Trump administration, where they go up from 179 all the way up to 614. And so what are we doing wrong? What should we do to solve this problem? I think that we must now act and secure some responsible gun legislation, starting with, of course, that we had this 18-year-old murderer, 18-year-old caused havoc, murdered all those folks at Robb Elementary. And why does the law allow an 18-year-old to purchase weapons of mass destruction? At the same time, he can't buy a beer. It makes no sense to me. Maybe I just don't get it.
Well, I guess the sense is being made, Nate, with the money that's being made with the sale of guns and drugs to our public, and the line of our politicians that allows this to happen, it seems like with total disregard for life. If you saw the tape that this boy produced of his shooting in Buffalo, for the first time, I was made aware of how powerful this semi-automatic rifle is. When he shoots the first victim, this woman in the blue dress walking around the car, it's 3 bursts at a time, and she fell over so quickly and so absolutely, it was almost devoid of human behavior. It was like these games they play on TV. It was a separation of something human going on. It's like I can see a person having no consciousness of taking a life. It sounds stupid when they do that. And this boy was very conscious. He went pop, 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 and that fast, as I said it, 3 people were dead. Then he shot through the windows and he walked in the building and went pop, 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 pop. And, oh, excuse me, when he saw the white guy lying on the floor and the guy put his hand, he apologized to the man for pointing the gun at him. And then went on pop, 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 to kill others. But it showed his consciousness of what he was doing, other than when he's driving up announcing what he's about, I'm here, okay. But the killing with that weapon just to me was a shock in how sudden the person fell and didn't move. And it was so sudden. It was detached of humanity. And now you got Reynolds Tobacco selling menthol cigarettes to the degree that you can't imagine, and advertising in the Black neighborhoods for menthol that they know causes cancer. And you got Al Sharpton and other Black politicians supporting the sale of menthol cigarettes in the neighborhood because they are getting money from Reynolds Tobacco for their campaigns and their foundations and their organization. They're making money off of it. So they don't give a about life and Black life. So it's about money. It's about money, clearly. And it's sad.
Well, menthol cigarettes, that's a new topic. Explain exactly what you mean. Is that something that's, unfortunately, I'm not keeping track.
They're addicting us to candy flavored, sugar sweet tasting cigarettes. They're addicting our young people to cigarettes, just like they did in other countries by giving them cigarettes at first and then selling them for a cheap price. And then before you know it, they're using half of their income to buy cigarettes every month. So menthol makes you have a cool feeling when you suck it in through your nostril, and it makes you feel like you are cool when you're smoking the cigarette. And so this article I read, and I sent it to you and Vanita in the LA Times about Reynolds Tobacco hiring a retired police chief, Black, to take Black legislators and politicians out to $50,000 pork chop lunches to get them to not pass laws that precluded the tobacco company from advertising heavily in the Black community like they do, because they still promoting and advertising, you said ads, and advertising these menthol cigarettes in the African-American community. You got this police chief saying that's racist to prevent that from happening because it will make young Black boys turn into cigarette dealers by selling single cigarettes rather than the pack. So we don't want them to become criminals. So we need to sell the whole pack of cigarettes in the community. Now, if that don't make sense to you, I'm sorry, brother, but that's, Vanita, help me here, because I get emotional when I talk about this stuff and I may lose a train of thought, but that's what they're doing. And Sharpton and other African-American politicians are supporting that. Yeah, they're making criminals out of young Black men if they take these cigarettes out of the neighborhood. So now sell the cigarettes. That makes sense?
No.
Vanita, am I misstating something?
No, you're right on point as usual. Several states are attempting to regulate menthol cigarettes because one, they're highly addictive, and they're disproportionately used by in African-American communities. About roughly 150 cities and counties have placed some sort of restriction on menthol, on the sale of menthol. Massachusetts has banned menthol altogether, and California, as you know, Attorney Grimes, has a proposed bill. 600,000 lives would be saved if there is a national ban, including 250,000 Black lives. And my question is, and we know that cigarettes are a leading cause of African-American deaths and chronic illness. And my question is, what is the articulated rationale by the civil rights organizations in opposing this type of life-saving legislation or regulation?
The rationale that I've read that's given predominantly is that, like this police chief they brought into the picture, he rationalize it with, it will create young Black men criminals by making them sell the cigarettes individually, and that's against the law. So rather than taking the chance on that, they should be able to sell the whole package of cigarettes in your neighborhood.
I would like to hear the rationale from the civil rights leaders, and this is and I saw that rationale, Attorney Grimes, in the article that you sent, and it's preposterous from my perspective. And this is another example of where civic and social and civil rights organizations have to be careful about the monies that they take to fund their foundations.
Right.
This is just a classic example of how important it is to scrutinize these issues and ensure that you're not taking money from organizations that are in essence killing our people.
Well, this is a serious issue. I looked in the article, thank you for sending the article to me, but the menthol cigarette led to 157,000 premature deaths between 1980 and 2018. And the culprit, the recipient of this, is like 85% are African-Americans, look like. So this is like a drug that inflicting harm on our community. It's a silent killer. You know, we have this product that is highly addictive. The original cigarettes contain ingredients that's addictive, and that's what led to this massive lawsuit. Florida got it right on that when they allowed them to do a class action, and because the cigarettes are so addictive. But this menthol cigarette thing, it just is a terrible idea, it appears, and it causing great hardship. But I was surprised that we have so many leaders from our community that actually support this. I mean, there's no valid justification that I can ever imagine that will allow the importation of this deadly product into our community. It's killing too many people. You know, yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Councilor.
Any of us who've seen people dying from emphysema, who can't get their breath because with these two tubes up their nose and oxygen tanks on their back. Nate, I've never smoked, and it always bothered me to even smell cigarette smoke. But I give a person a right to go over there and smoke. But to stand by and watch them get kids and young people addicted to this cancer-causing drug is just criminal to me. You know, pushing menthol when you know it has more of an addictive quality to it than the regular cigarettes. And knowing the history of cigarettes, I mean, Willie Gary hit big time down there in Florida, 22 billion on one case.
23.6 billion.
Billion, right.
The problem with that case, he got too much money on it. The verdict was too high.
But cause this chemical, this smoking cigarettes is dangerous to our health, and the secondary smoke is dangerous to our health. We don't have to be smokers to be in danger of cigarette smoke. So it just bothers me that our Black politicians and our Black leaders supposedly could buy into the legitimacy of this act. They ought to just sign off on heroin.
Oh no.
No, the heroin probably don't kill as many people as cigarettes. I don't know. I'm just throwing out stuff now. But
Attorney Banks, one of the things that saddened me this week is that we had somebody with a family member who died of an overdose. And I didn't realize this until I talked to the coroner this week, is that about a third of the deaths we've had here locally have been tied into drug use. This fentanyl laced product where our kids are using is the most deadly thing.
Yeah.
They'll die less harmful by taking a gun and shooting themselves in the head than taking this fentanyl drug. I don't get it. And there was a kid died this week that was just 18 years old. And what I realized, the drug is so fatal. You're talking about cigarettes, but cigarette is a drug. Menthol cigarette is a drug just like the fentanyl. But I'm just saying this as a public awareness. Cigarettes are bad, but also please watch your kid, because just like cigarette, there's fentanyl drugs, it's just killing kids in massive numbers. And I didn't realize the gravity of it. So just be careful, because we have good kids, Milton, that are ingesting these drugs and stuff like that, like the cigarettes. And I don't know whether or not there's a correlation between these type cigarettes and the use of drugs yet. I would like to see some studies on that to see whether or not there's any correlation. But it seemed like to me that we're losing too many of our young folks, whether cigarettes or drugs or shooting. We need to do something to intervene. We need some intervention on that, because we're losing too many folks.
Of course, they have stopped it so much now. I give them credit. They make it vapors now so that you don't smell the smoke or something. So they've addressed the problem on how to hide your smoke. I'm trying to be facetious and funny, I guess, but it's a sad thing that we are watching going on.
It certainly is an epidemic in this country that is disproportionately affecting people, young people. And it's highly addictive, and it can cause immediate respiratory distress and death when it's taken in high doses, and particularly when it's combined with other substances such as alcohol or cocaine and heroin.
And I don't understand how the vape thing work yet. I just see it sometimes. You see a little puff of smoke coming from somebody. You don't see a cigarette. You just know that they put that hand up to their face and they suck through something. You don't even know what it is. So.
Well, see, the problem is that I guess that because of the pandemic, I've not actually been around people that smoking and things like that. Because first we were wearing masks, and second we had social distances, and the third thing, here in our city, you can't smoke in any building. Mm-hmm. Smoking in buildings are disallowed. So, as a practical matter, that's one of the areas in which I've not had a lot of activities. Because when we go to church, for example, we still wear masks, and so this smoking sensation is one of those things that sound like it's getting out of control. But I'm just very fortunate that I've not seen a lot of activities around me with the smoking, because I certainly don't want to be involved with anybody that's smoking, because I understand that the people that smoke, the people that near them are just as in danger. The secondary smoke is just as bad as smoking. So you can die of cancer by secondary smoke. And a lot of people don't realize that, it's a deadly product. Attorney Bank in Chicago, what's the latest issues in your city today?
Well, I'm just looking at, still continuing on the topic of fentanyl use and abuse. I'm looking at the last 24 hours, and I just want to give you some examples of the headlines. Last 24 hours, Kansas City, Kansas police seize fake pills containing fentanyl. Woman gets $7 million bond after 5 kilos of fentanyl seized. Stolen, lost fentanyl prompts license suspension at Shropshire Medical Hospital. 6 arrested after police find over a pound of suspected fentanyl inside Maine home. And on and on and on. 18-month-old found sleeping with meth, fentanyl pills. And so this is a serious problem. And a serious problem here in Chicago, to your question, Attorney Lee. And over the Memorial Day weekend, there were numerous mass shootings in Chicago. Again, many of them don't make the national news. A mass shooting is what constitutes a mass shooting is subject to debate, but it is defined as a shooting involving 3 or more individuals. And so numerous mass shootings over the last 10 days here in Chicago, unfortunately.
Attorney Grime, LA,
Yes.
have you experienced mass shooting there also recently?
On a daily basis, sir. We have mass, I don't mean to be funny about it, but you know, the individual shootings on a daily basis, they don't even put them in the headlines anymore. So it has seemed to have increased. I don't know how to solve the problem, I guess.
Gun control, folks. In conclusion on this issue, you need to contact your legislators. Here in Indiana, effective July 1st, we have open carry. So now our government responds to this mass shooting, responds to the escalation in murders in our city and our state, is to do what? Give access to more guns for everybody. So our government has decided to make it easier for people to get more guns, so we have more killing. Now remember, in conclusion, Donald Trump is number 1 in 2 areas. 1, in federal deficit, he created 28% of the federal deficit since 1929. And number 2, mass murders. These mass shootings escalated all-time historic high under his administration. The solution has been more guns, protect the NRA, protect the so-called Second Amendment issue. Folks, this is not Second Amendment. What about 14th Amendment, equal protection of the law? What about First Amendment? But the point I'm making is that this mass shooting, folks, we got to band together. We got to work together to get legislation passed to stop it. Well, thank everybody for coming in today, and our guys could say a final goodbye, and we'll talk to you. I'll be off next week, but we'll be back in 2 weeks.
We got to stop letting our politicians work against us. Like Ted Cruz, I understand, gets about $375,000 a year funding from the gun people, and other politicians get hundreds of thousands of dollars a year funding from the gun lobbyists. So somehow or another, we got to come to the truth here, folks, about what are the politicians' main interests, themselves or the public.
And this is another example of why, again, and we stated almost on every call that, or every program, that this is why voting matters.
Yeah.
And that the time is now for reasonable gun reform in our nation. And Americans want that. And so please call your member of Congress to demand reasonable gun legislation, including red flag laws, reasonable background checks, safe storage laws. As Attorney Lee stated, there's no, it makes no sense that a 18-year-old cannot buy a beer, but can purchase an AR-15 rifle weapon of mass destruction. And so another reasonable law would be to increase the age from 18 to 21. These are all things that we can do now to protect our children.
Well, thank you all, and goodbye. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Take care, everyone.
Good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Don't get hacked.